This is Gemara Nazir Daf Nun, and we're holding on Nun Amid Aleph. We're about 10 lines down at the two dots, and we begin a new sugya. We're middle of the list that the Mishnah discussed, all the different cases that a Nazir, when he becomes Tameh, to the whole list of items that make him Tameh, then what? It destroys his Nazirus, he has to do Giluach, and he has to start again. And on the list, the next item on the list, as the Gemara here quotes, 10 lines down, the first line is Al. The next item on the list is Al Kazayis Mis, Val Kazayis Netzel. On volume, an olive's worth of the mace, or of this item called Netzel. When we read the Mishnah, we gave the basic interpretation of Netzel, and now, says the Gemara, we're going to dive deeper. What exactly is this entity called the Netzel? Says the Gemara, Vezeu Netzel. What is Netzel? Says the Gemara, Basar Amis Shekarash. This is basar, the flesh of the meat, shekarash, that congealed, umayel sheritiach, and the fluids that bubble when they're heated. So we have the actual flesh or the fluids of the mace that they're congealed, they bubble when they're boiled. And we're going to delve very deeply into what precisely and at what point we shall say, is this flesh that it's still going to give off Toma? So says the Gemara, Dami, what exactly is this Basar Amis Shekarash that's congealed? What is the case that we're referring to? Is the case that you didn't know that this entity in front of you is Dideyu, that you didn't know that this came from the mace? So Kikarash Mayave. So the fact that it's congealed, what's the difference? What's the question? Maybe it's congealed, but it's not actually the basar. Maybe it's not actually the flesh of the body. What else could it be? Maybe it's saliva, maybe it's mucus, the Mefarshim explain. And right now we think that these entities also could congeal. So the fact that it's congealed, what does that prove to us? Asks the Gemara. Rather, suggests the Gemara, Eladiadinan Didideyu. Rather, you know what the case must be? The case must be that you know that it came from the mace. So you have this congealed entity that you know came from the mace. So ask the Gemara, if that's the case, Avagav Karash. So then what's the difference that it's Karash, that it's congealed? Even if it's not congealed, if I have a fleshy substance that came from the mace, then it should impart Toma and thereby make the Nazir Tameh. So what's the difference whether it is Karash or not once I know it came from the mace? So answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Yirmiyah, explains Rav Yirmiyah. Bistam, in a case where I don't know whether what the item is, I don't know if it came from the corpse, if it didn't. I don't know if it's this mucus or if it's the flesh, but I know it came from the corpse. So then, Karash moyalu. Then if it's karash, if it's congealed, then that shows me that it came from the mace. It's netzel and it has this toma. Loi karash toma kichayviniu. If it's not karash, if it's not congealed, that's when I think that maybe it is the saliva, maybe it is mucus. So the Gemara now is explaining. It's true that I know that this entity came from the mace, but the reason that it's important if it's congealed is because that's how I know that it's the flesh of the body that gives off tuma, and not necessarily the saliva or the mucus of the body. So that's part A. And which part is it going to be metameh? The basar hamis, that's karash, when I know it came from the mace, that's how I know it's indeed the basar hamis. So Abaye Rabba. So Abaye asks Rabba, Yesh netzel lebehima or ein netzel lebehima? This din of netzel, this din of this congealed fleshy substance of the corpse that imparts toma, asks Abaye to Rava, does this apply to behema or not? And the Gemara explains, Mi amrinan, do we say gemiri netzel dasime adam, that what? It's a gemiri, which always means alach l'moshe misinai. Then when does it give off toma? If it's me adam. Avodasi b'mehema loy. But if it comes from a behema, then it's not going to be part of this alach l'moshe misinai. It's not going to have this din of netzel. It's not going to give off toma. Oidelma loishna. Or ask the Gemara, maybe there's no difference. So that is the shaila of the Gemara. What is the status of the netzel from a behema? So the Gemara now continues to explain the question about 8 lines. So the bottom of the Amid, the first one line is Dilma. It's good according to the mandam that says Toma Chamura ad liger. Now, this ad liger is a difficult phrase. So the truth is, we can look at the Mefarshim over here, but just to explain, ad liger is quoting part of a pasuk. Literally means until the ger taishav, and this is quoting the pasuk in Devarim that says you can eat, you cannot eat from the nevela. Rather, you should give it to the ger taishav. So says the Gemara, this is good according to the Manda Amar, Machlek is in Bechayrais, that learns out that the dead nevela only has a din of nevela as long as it is edible for human consumption. And vitoma kala ad likelef, whereas that's toma chamura. Whereas toma kala, but it's going to have a lower degree of toma ad likelef. If it's edible by a dog, Shabir, then everything is good. And from the contrast, we'll understand a little bit better. According to the Mandamar that says that no, it's going to have a din of Tumachamura until it is no longer fit for an animal. Michael and Meimar, then what's the difference? Whether this din of Nitzel Behema or not, meaning asks the Gemara, it's certainly fit for an animal to eat this congealed fat, this congealed fleshy substance of an animal, and therefore if it can be eaten by an animal, it should have a din of Tumah according to that Mandamar. So Tashema, so the Gemara proves, Himchubar Tamei B'chama Tahor. If this was melted, this fat, this fleshy substance of the dead animal was melted in a fire, it is tamei, but in the sun, it is tar. So suggest the Gemara, 4 lines to the bottom, if you're going to tell me, according to the second Mandamar, that it's dependent upon whether it is roi for an animal to eat, then I feel b'chama nami. So why is it only if it's melted in the fire, even in the sun? So says the Gemara, you got your science wrong. Emas mamchile. At what point does this flesh, when does it melt? Basar de isruach. After it is isruach bechama, after it's putrefied, after it spoils in the sun, and therefore it came into Israel Chavle Afar. Once it's spoiled, it's considered dust, and therefore it's not even fit for a behemoth. And of course, within a few weeks of Pesach, this calls to mind at what level chametz is an issue when it's ro'il achilas kelev. That's the same thing that we're learning over here, that if this fat is that ro'i, even for a dog, even for an animal to eat it, then it's not going to give off tumah anymore. So the Gemara doesn't fully answer the question, because in clarifying the question, the Gemara wanted to say which mandam we're going with. We said it's not relevant. Why not? Because at the point that it's a mechua, it's the point that it melts in the sun, it's no longer edible, and therefore it's no longer ro'i la'achilas kelev. And from there, says the Gemara, Tinan. We learned in a Mishnah, 2 lines on the bottom, Nun Amar Aleph. Kol nitzuk tahar. Nitzuk is when I pour one thing into next. When I pour an item, nitzuk is the connection, the stream. That connections is nitzuk in liquids, is nitzuk in steam. So says this brisa, this Mishnah, Mishnah and Machshirim, which is all about Tumah V'Tayra, etc. That kol nitzuk tar, the liquid that is poured, the stream that connects, is tar chutz, except for midvash hazif and vatzapichis. So for zifite honey and tzapichis, these two entities, as which we're going to see, are thicker entities. When there's a nitzuk, there's a connection between a top vessel and a bottom vessel, then those items, this honey and whatnot, is considered connected. But all other liquids are not considered connected. And with that, we turn over to Nun Amid Aleph. And, Nun Amid Beis, continues the Gemara, Beishamei Oimrim, says Beishamei, not only this zifite honey, but says Beishamei, af ha-mikvah, shel grisin. Mikvah is a porridge and oatmeal, even the porridge of grisin, of split beans, vishal pool, or whole beams, that also connects via the nitzik, via this connection of the stream in May. Why? Because it pulls it backwards. It springs it back into the upper container. Meaning, when I pour like this, when I pour a liquid, the moment I stop, it cuts off at the moment I stop, and that's it. But a thick liquid, an oatmeal type liquid, says Beis Shammai, when I stop pouring and I pull back, the oatmeal at some level pulls back. Therefore, there is a connection between the two vessels. Obviously, the difference is going to be that if the bottom vessel is tamei, it's going to pull that tumah back into the top vessel. So ba'i rami bar chama, and of course we've gotten into these halachas based on the fact that our Mishnah dealt with different areas of tumah v'tayra, kazayis means and whatnot. So now we're dealing with different areas of tumah and the spread of tumah. So ba'i rami bar chama, 3 lines on the top, nunam and beis. Yesh nitzag la'eichlin or ein nitzag la'eichlin. Ask Rami Bar Chama, according to the Tanakama differentiated between water and this devash hasifin vatzapichis. According to that Tanakama, is there a din of nitzuk for food that's melted and poured or not? Do we say misham this may riri, vani less may riri? Meaning, what is the nikuda of this devash I keep saying it wrong. Of this devash hazifin vatzapiches. What is the reason why that honey, according to the Tanakama, what is the reason why that honey, according to the Tanakama, has a din of nitzik? Is it because of the riri? Because it's thick, and when I stop pouring the honey, it pulls back. And if that were to be true, the honey less riri, and food that's melted doesn't have riri, doesn't have strands that pull back, meaning it doesn't have this sticky substance, we'll call it. Or maybe the reason is, says the Gemara, because it's very thick. So ask the Gemara, according to Tanakama, what is the nikuda? What is the detail that the zifite honey has a din of nitzik? Is it because it's thick and therefore melted food will be the same? Or is it because it's sticky, it's stringy, and therefore melted food would not be the same? So Amar Rava comes to prove 8 lines down. Tashema says Rava, Chelev hameis, the fat of a meis shu shalim, which is complete. V'ticha, and you melt it, tamei, it is still tamei. Haya mifurad v'hitichai, if it was separated into smaller pieces, the mace, and then you melt it, and then when you melt these small pieces, it congeals tar. Then the din is it's tar. So says the Gemara, if you're going to tell me there's no din of nitzik by food, shalim v'itichai nami l'taher. When the mace is shalim, is complete, and he melted it down, it should also be tar. Why should it also be tar? Because when you melted it, some of the mace, some of the fats must have ran off the sides of the frying pan as you're melting it during the heating process before it melted. And when that happened, now it's only connected by thin streams of fat. And now it's smaller than a kzayis. If it's smaller than a kazayis, it should be tar. But since the Brisa says that it's still tar even after it's melted, this seems to prove that it's not a connection. Meaning, if there's a connection between the streams, then even though it's less than a kazayis in the pan, it's still going to give off tama. From the fact that it says it's not, seems to show us that there is no din by oichlin. Amar Rav Zira, no raya. I know Marbreid Ravina Targimna Hacha. I and Marbreid Ravina explained as follows: Hachama Eskinan Kon de Bahadi de Mertachle Salik Amuda Denura. That what's the case as he heated it Salik Amuda Denura to where Lepume Demana. That what happened that after he heated it, the fat from the fire shot up of the mouth of the container. Vakarash cooled off there. And it cooled off and congealed there. So it's all together, meaning we're assuming that some melted over the sides. Sarah of Zira, no, it sort of like clumps together, cools off and congeals. And therefore, you can have a kazayis in one place, and has nothing to do with the nitzik of this food entity. Says the Gemara, and therefore you can't bring me a raya from this case, because maybe in this case the reason why it's tar is tamei is because Lamaisa congealed all in one place. So Amalei Ravina Ravashi. So Ravina says Ravashi. Let's bring another ayat. Tashma Beishami Oimrim. Afa Mikvah Shal Kvisif Shal Pulman Meishayin. So Ledes Lacharein. What did Beishamai say? What's the reason for the oatmeal? Because it's Ledes Lacharein, because it springs back. So what does that seemingly show to us? That seemingly shows that the reason is because of these stringy areas that pull back. So therefore, the Tanakama should agree to that point, and the whole machlokes should be what level of stringiness, of elasticity. Does honey have enough, or does porridge have enough? But seemingly everyone agree the food has a din of nitzik. The question is how much you need. Is it the thinner strings of the honey or the thicker strands of the porridge? That is Ravina Zuraya. Says the Gemara, no, Raya, midi ayri asa mishon disamichen, hacha mishom riri. They're two different dinim. I can't equate them. The Tanakama says that the reason is because of samichin, because it's thick, whereas the Beishama is saying the mikveh because of the riri, because of the strands, and therefore there's not necessarily a raya from that case. The Gemara leaves that we don't have a raya. What is the din regarding nitzik of the food? We continue about 10 lines from the bottom, the two dots, Amali Tarved Rekem. Now we have a ladle full of the dust of the dead body, and that as well gives off Tumah, makes the Nazir to Giluach and restart his Naziris. Ask the Gemara Vekama Shiura, what is the measure? How much is a ladle full? Chizkiya Amar Male pieces Hayat. Chizkiya means it's a palmful. Rav Yochanan Amar Male Chafnav. Not a palmful, but rather a handful. Male chafna from the lush of chafina. What's the difference between these two? One excludes the fingers or not. If I say a palm, it's just the inside of my palm. If I say the whole hand, it's including my fingers. So ask the Gemara on Chizkiya that says it's just the palm. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Malei Tarvi Rekiv Shamru, this ladleful that we're speaking about, Yeshnan me Ikar Etzbais, Ulemala, clearly including the fingers, that's boys. From the base of the fingers and upwards, Divir Rameir, V'chachamim Aimrim, Malei Chafnav, says the Chachamim a handful. So B'Shamal Rav Yochanan Udamar Rabbanan. Rav Yochanan saying like the Rabbanan that it's Mali Chafnav, it's a whole handful. El Chizkiya Keman, Chizkiya that says a palm goes with neither sheet on this brisa. Like Rameir who said the end of the fingers, like Rabbanan who says the full hand. So Amri, so the answer for Chizkiya Mali pieces ayat. Answers a palmful of Chizkiya is Umalai Kishri Etzba'aisav Ulamala Chad Shiuru. What did the sheet of Ramir mean when he said from the base of the fingers and upwards? He meant a palmful. That is exactly what he meant. Mali Kishri Etzba'aisav Ulamala, from the knuckles and up. That is what Chizkiya meant. So really there are two ways of saying the same thing. Says the Gemara, Amar Le Rav Simi Bar Abba Lirav Papa Mimai. How do you know when you're Mimai Dahai Mikisha Etzvayzav Lamala? How do you Liroish? How do you know from the knuckles and up means the top of the fingers? Tilma Lamata Miyade. Maybe it means towards the wrist. Tavle Mali Pisa Yad, which is nothing other than the actual palmful. Meaning you're coming along and saying an interesting way of explaining Chizkiya that it could fit with Rameir. Maybe a mamish is what Chizkiya meant, actual palm. From the bottom of the fingers towards the palm, says the Gemara Teiku, that we're going to have to wait for Aliyah Navi to answer up with this question within Chizkiya, what exactly it means, a palmful. We'll pick it up from the top of Nunal for the next year. B'siyata Tishmaya.